Well, today's show is about one of the hottest topics in human resources right now. ICE. You know, I never thought that we'd have to have this conversation, but I brought Karl Ulrich back because I have to tell you, I am tired of the hysteria. And I know you've got to be seeing it too.
See it a lot, yeah. There's a lot of concern about what happens if, and we have a lot of foreign workers. We're worried that if ICE comes to raid them, we'll, lose some of them, legitimately or otherwise, and that's going to decimate our business. And you hear a lot of concerns about that, and it is a legitimate problem.
But Karl, we as business owners have so many other things that they're trying to juggle and keep track of. And panic on this is just, there's a proper way of handling this. And I really want the audience to hear about this. And to start thinking in these terms. Because, look, we don't know what's going to happen. And none of us know exactly what's going to happen. But I started thinking, I want you to listen to the show and think of your emergency response plans. In fact, that was one of the very first shows we did here a couple years ago on this podcast was, do you have an emergency response plan? I think this particular time and activity requires an emergency response plan.
I agree. I think employers who utilize foreign workers, especially those who have a lot of high numbers of foreign workers, you need a process in place that you can go to when and if a raid occurs in your workplace. But in addition to that, I think prevention goes a long way, right? So if you are doing your job from the front end when you're hiring people, completing the I-9 forms properly, looking at the documentation, supporting documents as needed for everyone, and you're maintaining those files in the right way, there's no real need to be particularly anxious about it. You have to be aware of the risk. You have to be aware of what might happen if, and have a plan in place. But it starts with those I-9 forms, and the proper onboarding process includes that. So if you are not sure whether you're completing those I-9 records correctly or properly or fully, you probably need to look for some assistance right away.
Absolutely.
Get that done.
Absolutely. These are non-negotiables. That I-9 is a non-negotiable. Yep. I mentioned on the show a couple of weeks ago that I had someone call me and say, I've got over 900 I have to audit. And I know that I'm missing some. And I applauded her because I said, look, at least you know the importance of this.
Yeah.
I don't care whether you have 2 employees or 200. The I-9s are required and you have to have them.
Yeah, and a periodic audit is useful. If you're using, as I say, a lot of foreign workers and you are uncertain about your full compliance with the I-9 requirements, having someone from the outside, like you, Pandy, coming in and taking a look at those records from time to time is not a bad idea, and probably not too often if you do it once every other year.
I totally agree. But then let's talk about the communication, because when we're talking about emotions, whether it's frustration or panic, or it starts at the top. Mm-hmm. And if we can make sure that our senior leadership is feeling comfortable that they're ready for anything if it should knock on the door, I think that needs to be conveyed to the rest of the team, don't you? I
agree. I think what you're really talking about here, you mentioned it earlier, is having a response plan ready.
Yeah.
And what are those things? What are the elements or ingredients of a proper response plan? Well, I think it starts from the top. It's not something that an HR generalist is going to put together for the middle management. It is a top-down. It has to start at the top of the organization, and with the sign-off and approval of the top leadership of the organization. Most importantly, to start off, I think there needs to be a compliance officer, someone who in the organization is responsible, is the contact person.
I love it.
in the event
I love it.
of an ICE raid. Somebody comes to the door with a subpoena, right? The person behind the desk, the receptionist, isn't going to know how to handle that, and you're not going to find a safety officer to come in, and you're not going to find a lower-level HR person to handle that. You're going to want someone in the leadership team, preferably in the C-suite, to be there.
Spokesperson for the company.
Spokesperson for the company who's familiar with the response plan.
Yeah.
And can enforce it, make sure that it gets carried out. And that is usually someone in the executive leadership of the organization.
Yeah, and somebody that's knowledgeable. I want this to be as saturated with information and knowledgeable. So lead us right into the types of subpoenas.
Okay. In an ICE raid, there can be two different types of subpoenas generally. There's something called an administrative subpoena, and that administrative subpoena is a subpoena that's issued by the Department of Homeland Security. It's essentially an executive branch subpoena. It's an investigative subpoena, not by a court or not by a judge. And that subpoena generally is going to give the officers the right to explore public areas in the workplace, things that are open and available to the public. They can go to those locations. They can find and talk to anybody who is in those locations who happens to be available. They cannot go behind closed doors. They can't force their way into private areas of the organization. The subpoena is limited in that respect. It's very different from a judicial subpoena. The judicial subpoena, on the other hand, is a subpoena that's issued by a judge, by a court, and it's going to contain a caption on it, and it's going to say it's going to have a court caption on it, and it's going to be signed by a judge. Administrative subpoenas are usually signed by an official, probably an officer of the Department of Homeland Security, a regional director of some kind. But the judge is going to sign off on a judicial subpoena, and that's a very different animal. A judicial subpoena generally is going to tell you precisely what it is they're going to go after.
Or who.
Administrative subpoenas are more general.
Okay.
Judicial subpoenas have to be specific. So I'm going to go after these 4 or 5 different individuals. We're looking for them. We also want to inspect your I-9 records, and we want to look into your loading dock area or something. It has to be a very specific, detailed subpoena. Otherwise, it can be challenged. But that type of a subpoena can go into private areas if the subpoena directs it to. The officers can go to private areas and to private offices through files. Again, as long as they're specifically stated, those areas and files and records are specifically identified in the subpoena itself. So different types of subpoenas, and understanding which one of those you have in front of you is important. And that's not the job of a receptionist.
No.
It's probably not the job of a HR person. It's usually going to be the job of general counsel of the corporation or outside counsel or somebody in the executive suite or some combination of the two.
Yeah. So, okay, we've established that they need to have somebody knowledgeable who's prepared to deal with that conversation.
Right.
We have a receptionist or someone who's at the entry area of that public access who's going to call that individual in and have them take over the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm thinking, they should be calling their attorney right away.
I'm certainly in agreement with that, being an attorney myself. But I agree, yeah, because I think there are going to be some issues about the enforcement of the subpoena that might benefit from having a legally trained eye present.
Yeah,
and that, and particularly if it's an organization with a lot of foreign workers, a lot of people, and especially a judicial subpoena where the particulars really have to be watched, and having an attorney present who's comfortable with the process, I think, can be really useful.
Well, while we're waiting for the attorney to show up, representative of the company can be checking the credentials of the person standing in front of him.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And they have the right to do that.
They absolutely have the right to do that. And the other thing they can do is they can make the request to make a copy of the subpoena.
Well, there you go. There you go.
They're probably going to get a copy of it if they haven't already. But if they need to, they should make a copy immediately of the subpoena. The other thing I would do is as the subpoena is being enforced, as the records are being reviewed, or as the people are being interviewed, whoever is, we call it babysitting the investigation for the company, should be making notes, taking records, taking notes of what it is the investigators are doing, what records they accept and take, what people they interview. You can request copies of any statements that are taken. And so, maintaining those records is part of the process. And so, to the extent that there may ever be at some point a enforcement action that you want to defend, having the records of what the investigation included is very important to that defense.
I'm gonna suggest too, if you can, get this in a private area. Don't let this stay out on the manufacturing floor. Don't let this stay out in the cubicle village. Get all those activities away so that nobody really knows what's going on other than those who have a need to know.
Agreed. If there are people who are being interviewed, a judicial subpoena, and you have the ability to bring them into a conference room for the interview, do that. The less disruptive you can make it, the better. Now, in some cases, the investigators may not, the officers may not want that. They may want to they have access to the loading dock area, and the subpoena allows them the right to inspect that area, then they'll want to do that. And of course, you'll have to allow them access. The other point here is that to the extent that the requests of the officers are legitimate, supported by the subpoena particulars, particularly in a judicial subpoena scenario, you don't ever want to block their access, prevent them from doing their job. Be as cooperative, I think, as you can possibly be, subject to, again, the legal parameters of those judicial orders.
Well, let's go over the don'ts. Mm-hmm. Please do not decline and interfere with an investigation. Don't decline or say that somebody doesn't work there. Don't assist an employee out the back door and to help their escape. Don't shred or destroy records. My gosh, that would get you. I mean, that would just bury the company.
Right. Yeah, you have the officer in the conference room reviewing I-9 records, and somebody in the HR department in another room destroying the records that they think are not germane to the case, or that they don't want to be seen. I mean, that would be a pretty stupid thing to do, but stranger things have
happened.
Carl. Stranger things have happened, right?
Emotion. People feel like they're protecting, and this is their family. Mm-hmm. If somebody's been working there for a while, that person's become their family. They will do anything to protect them.
That's right. Yeah.
Which puts the company and that individual at huge risk.
That's right. And I think it bears repeating what we talked about at the top end of this session, and that is, if you have your I-9 records reviewed regularly, you do a good job of onboarding, you really don't, from a company's perspective, have a whole lot to worry about. The people you're going to be hiring are going to be properly work authorized. Mm-hmm. And even to the extent that there may be a technical noncompliance issue, the extent you've done it correctly in 100 different cases, but you have one case where there's a document that may have slipped through the cracks, or you didn't get a properly filled out form, it's going to be less significant than if you have a pattern and practice of noncompliance. When they're doing ICE raids, what we know is they're after the big non-compliant employers, the folks who are doing a lot of bad stuff. Mm-hmm. The single employee here and there isn't worth the time and effort to go out on an ICE raid. The companies that they're after are the big ones who hire a lot of people, and they tend to take shortcuts as a matter of practice in the business. And we know of a lot of different industries where that can sometimes happen. And so you have to be, if you're doing your job on the front end, you're going to minimize your risks significantly, and you're going to get through this pretty well.
Well, and they're also after the criminals.
That's right.
They're after the ones who really shouldn't be here for public safety. And you don't want to be caught trying to protect them just because you know them for a different reason, or know them differently than how ICE knows them.
And the other thing is, there may be such circumstances, and we have seen this too, where a foreign worker is legitimately here, has a legitimate work authorization, but is flagged for some reason. And the problem isn't with the foreign worker necessarily, then with the records that the U.S. government has on that individual. Either there's a mistaken identity or there's
there you go.
And this has happened. We've seen this a couple of times in the last year or two. Don't panic. I think you should have a resource available for those employees, outside counsel, to handle that case. If there's a question, a legal question, and there is a legitimate defense that needs to be asserted, you can refer that person to outside legal counsel, and the process can move forward on that basis. But having those resources available can really help. But again, it's about tamping down to some extent the stress and the panic. If you have these pieces in place ahead of time, I think it can really help a lot when and if the time comes you need them.
And it just dawned on me, it wouldn't hurt if you go back and audit or have your emergency contact information updated. So if by some odd chance an employee is taken in custody for a particular reason, you can contact their family and at least let them know where there might be children that need to be picked up at school, or they might need to be checking on a parent or something. So that wouldn't hurt for you guys just to update what the employee contact information is.
I think it's a great idea. Yeah.
It's just a thought. But just to summarize, and again, none of us know what's going to happen. But the first thing and most important thing is educate your team. Assign roles, just as you said, Karl. I mean, let's decide who's going to do what, when, and where, and educate them on the different subpoenas. Oh, public access.
There you go.
How many doors do you have open right now? If need be, and you're concerned about this, shut and limit down to just very particular entrances so that you're going to know if somebody comes in.
Right.
Did we cover it all?
I think so. I'm sure there's more to cover, but I think we hit the highlights, Pandy. So
you know what?
We'll start there.
Please, if nothing else, just thank you for listening, and just go back to your team and tell everybody just to calm down. Just calm down. Reassure them that you're doing the right things. And if not, call Karl.
Thank you. I'll be here.
And we hope you'll come back too as well here at the Human Resource. Take care.